summation of each Hebrew letter. So check that out, Gematria, if you're unfamiliar with it. So I figured out that these gematria names for the actual color words, like Adam being for red, for instance, and I won't go through them all, but that's an example. So the number for Adam, and when you run through the other 5 of the other colors in the rainbow, which are in the Old Testament, so 5 of these specific color words, if you put them in order, in the direction that they'd be through the actual sound waves, the spectrum of the sound waves, they actually fall in a numerical order. The same, and it's a correlation. So you start to have these things where the space away from each number creates a pattern. So then I started mapping other sensory modalities, like hear, because that's hearing, of course. So then I started taking vision and the color spectrum, brain waves. So then we had this sort of left hemisphere, like numerical code embedded in how we were actually perceiving sound. So how our ears are actually hearing it. If we map the solfege system on it, the Western tonal system, onto this Kabbalistic system of the summation, the gematria, it creates a Pearson correlation in the 0.9 range. So we're talking which means that it's beyond statistical doubt that this is happening by chance. So then, great, fine. So that was just these 2 little things that have a correlation: the gematria, the letters, the gematria, the color that the words represent. So the number for Adam, the frequency for red, and then a particular tone. Okay, if you look at the map I have, you can figure all this out through that. So that was 3, which brought the probability up another notch. So then we're talking now. I put brainwaves on top of that. So I have these alpha, delta, these brainwaves that our brain's going through, cycling through for different aspects of consciousness. So throwing that onto it, so now we have these 4 specific perceptual modalities that are all falling in the exact same, basically they're the same frequencies in a lot of sense, the same types of energy is moving through. So are providing these statistically improbable sequences. So they're all lined up at different, in my eyes, different spots in the same continuum. So we're talking about brain waves that are very slow. And then we got way up at the top, we got light waves. So would be these color waves and how light's moving. So that's basically like, and then in the middle we have sound waves, and then this, wherever you want to place this kind of left-brained gematria, like literal thing in there somewhere. Maybe that's above light. I'm not really sure if there's non-local thinking going on, so I'm not really sure how that's going. So then you have this big continuum. So that's basically the gist of how I kind of mapped sound onto it. And if you look at that map that I made, where it's a septagram map, so this is all based around a 7 system of 7s, based from 12s to 7s to 5s. So I use that as a way in to the Magik system, and base that on a way to make it, map on or be able to transpose it onto the old system. So I had a way in, so I could start to use this kind of information esoterically.
Mm-hmm. I see. Wow, that's absolutely fascinating, and quite obviously, I think a lot of people that are involved in magic totally get the impact of vibrant color and sound on the individual psyche. I don't know if they really get the gist of it from a neuroscientific standpoint, something that you and I would be both familiar with. We can actually see these things, with a functional MRI machine, and we can know that what parts of the brain are stimulated by certain sound waves and certain visual cortex stimuli that the colors and things like sigils stimulate within our brains. But if they are cognizant of these things, this should make perfect sense, so that they can totally understand what you're saying and how, I guess, cutting edge this really is. One phrase that you used one time that I saw was that the new Yan was going to be the age of the DNA walker. What did you mean by that?
The DNA walker?
Yeah.
Well, DNA is kind of the pivotal aspect of this entire I think, system, which I think is always what it was. And I think when we're talking about we hear the watered down versions in mythologies about all these various races having all these different kinds of superpowers and all these kinds of different flying around spaceships, and if you follow through with all the occult traditions, you find out all this kind of stuff, of course, as I'm sure you know. So it's all genetic. These people had this power, these people had that power. So I mean, at this day and age, now we have actual science that's actually been able to get down and into our deep cellular basis and determine, even on a neurological level, how things like mRNA and things like that, and these proteins and nucleotides are actually transferring information back and forth, and how you can actually change this through restructuring your metabolic system, and how it's being tampered with through your metabolic system, and how it actually is being triggered and enhanced or suppressed by actual thoughts. So, I mean, actually, when you're talking about sigils, like you're just talking about, and then these kinds of neural enhancements like music and sound and all these different kinds of ways to make our brain move back and forth between different levels of consciousness, that's what I mean by the DNA walker and all these kinds of phrases. People that are going to be able to actually use magic to actually gather information that's been individually tailored for them, because, like we're talking about, their metabolic system specifically designing proteins to go back and forth that's transferring information, which is basic scientific information and mainstream information. So you're changing this actually through your thoughts. So that's kind of how I'm restructuring the system to kind of adopt these kinds of ideas.
I see. Does this system in any way affect like what some people call dormant DNA? Is that the DNA that your magical system is addressing once the metabolic system has been, I guess, reconfigured through the use of your system and the change of diet and the change of thought that you just mentioned?
I think it's a continuum. I think that the example that I kind of use to explain sometimes to people is for something like diabetes, where if you have a predisposition in your family to have something like diabetes, then if you know about this, you can change your behavior, your diet, and things like that to kind of suppress this genetic kind of activation. So you can kind of suppress this predisposition that you have if you know first, in a way, So that's something that we know because we have medicine, right? So we have this scientific information that we can take these tests. But for magic, we don't have those kinds of tests. So we have these other experiences, like these conversations with holy guardian angels, so to speak, that gives us this kind of prognosis or diagnosis about the state of affairs that we're actually in. So we can then tailor our behavior so that we can then activate or suppress certain things that we may or may not be predisposed to. But as a human being, I think that we all have, and I'll get to the junk thing in a second, but the junk thing sort of, I think, is brought in, it's recruited to kind of help out with the process of either neutralizing or activating or actually storing more information, or maybe has more information stored in it, but through these other processes has to lead back and forth into these directions, which would be considered some sort of like material abyss, or so to speak, where we have these superpowers, where we have non-local brain functioning and all this crazy stuff, where we're seeing like into the future, or clairvoyance, or all these things that would fall on the very high end of the cognition continuum, past things like intuition up into like precognition and clairvoyance, and up way up in that direction of things. So that's what I think.
I see. Wow. I mean, it's obvious to me that you got everything covered, man. I don't think you missed a thing. How, if somebody is trying to do that and somebody's awakened to the point that they know that they need to implement some type of system to, I guess, do this, and they don't want to utilize, I guess, psychedelic substances to do these similar type of things, because some people theorize that the whole purpose of psychedelic substances is that they actually activate and make the individual aware of what you just had talked about. Some people wouldn't use terminology the way we do, with Holy Guardian Angel and whatnot. But does the system require the use of any psychedelic substances, or is this something that through the use of the system, they will eventually be able to, I guess, awaken those similar functions?
Yeah, I don't think that